Hey everyone, Venti's rerun is here, and I want to talk about some important things you should consider before you either pull him or skip him. I will go into his strengths, weaknesses, and how he fares with his biggest competitor, Kazuha. Alright, let us begin. First, as for Venti's strengths, he's an amazing crowd control character, and I would go so far as to say the best, thanks to his burst. His burst will pull enemies together and group them tightly together. This is great, as with enemies being grouped up, you can deal safe hits without being worried about getting hit. Next, the range at which his burst will drag enemies in is also great. Enemies far from his initial bow shot will be pulled in and brought into his burst. Moving on, his burst makes the damage you will output more efficient. With the casting of his burst, enemies will be stuck so close together that any damage you deal will be dealt to all enemies in his burst. In a sense, your DPS would be increased by this, as all enemies are being damaged at once, allowing you to clear the abyss and other fights with multiple enemies much quicker. On top of the great utility his burst provides, it also deals strong damage, as his burst will deal Venti's own anemo damage as well as swirl damage. Moreover, his burst has great uptime thanks to his talent, Storm Eye. This talent reduces Venti's burst energy cost by 15, changing his burst from 60 to 45. And for party members whose element were swirled during his burst, they will also gain 15 energy. This talent is great as it will allow you to spam his and the other party members' bursts. Next, he is a character that does not need a lot of investment to be great. The utility he brings to a team, that being grouping enemies together and activating Viridescent Veneer's element resistance, can be done with little investment. Though his damage will of course be reduced quite a bit, the most important things required of him, as I've just mentioned, can still be done. As for the reasons not to wish for Venti, these reasons are based on himself, and of course the elephant in the room, Kazuha. The first reason you may not want to wish for Venti is Venti's vertical grouping. As great as Venti's crowd control is, it unfortunately has the caveat of grouping high in the air. Now, some characters can still hit enemies while floating with Venti's burst, yet there are also characters that can either at times hit enemies in Venti's burst, or entirely cannot hit enemies in his burst. In comparison to Kazuha, his burst swirling occurs at ground level, allowing for all characters to be able to damage enemies while his burst is active. So though Venti's grouping is great, unfortunately this aspect of grouping will limit the characters you can play with them, unlike Kazuha, who can be played with all characters. Next, big enemies such as bosses, ruin guards, ruin graders, and rift wolves cannot be manipulated by Venti's burst. This is a big deal and an important thing to consider, as one of the most important aspects of Venti's kit is nullified by not only enemies in the outside world, but enemies constantly being used in the Spiral Abyss. Though you still can use his burst on these enemies, it'll be easier if they are frozen or enemies that don't move much like ruin guards or graders, and of course it will still deal damage and activate 4-piece Viridescent. But for enemies that move around constantly, such as rift wolves, you will have to deal with the hassle that is bringing these enemies to his burst and essentially rely on the AI of these enemies to comply with you. And the AI can be at times very annoying and very unpredictable. If you're not able to get the AI to comply with you, Venti's burst will be difficult to actually utilize. As for Kazuha in this aspect, though he too cannot move big enemies with his burst, he can move some of them with his skill and at the very least keep them stationary with the repeated swirling of his burst. With them being still, you can manipulate them and bring them closer to one another. Also, Kazuha's burst is much wider than Venti's, so though you may not be able to manipulate them, you will still have a higher likelihood of actually hitting enemies with Kazuha's burst than Venti's. Furthermore, with how wide Kazuha's burst is, his burst's transfusion of elements is better than Venti's, as although Venti's burst will constantly apply an element, his burst is very concentrated and small, so if the problems I previously mentioned with his burst occur, it will be a hassle to actually take advantage of this. For Kazuha's case, though his application of elements isn't as fast, it is wider. This is great as say if you have a bad uptime on a character's burst and need their burst for applying their element, you can still apply their element to an enemy and swirl it with Kazuha, causing their element to be efficiently applied. This will allow for easier melts, vaporizes, freezes, and superconducts to occur. Next, unlike Kazuha, Venti does not buff his party with elemental damage bonuses. Now, though this may not be a weakness of Venti and rather a strength of Kazuha, this aspect of Kazuha is very strong and very useful. Though Venti does technically buff party members' damage with 4-piece Viridescent, he does not provide additional elemental damage bonuses as Kazuha does thanks to his talent, Poetic Fubatsu. With a full elemental mastery build, Kazuha can grant party members around a 30 to 40% additional elemental damage bonus, on top of the resistance shred provided by 4-piece Viridescent. This buffing is huge and is applicable to all characters aside from Geo, so a huge range of characters can be greatly buffed by Kazuha. This is one of the main reasons why Kazuha is so sought after. So, should you wish for Venti? I'd say it depends. If you desperately need an anemo support and cannot wait for at least one patch, if you do not like Kazuha nor his kit, but instead like Venti and prefer his kit and strengths, such as making fights with small to medium-sized enemies a breeze, no pun intended, I'd recommend to wish for Venti. If these scenarios don't apply to you, or you instead want a universal and more comfortable anemo support that can buff your team's damage, then I'd highly recommend to instead wait for Kazuha and wish for him. In terms of a kit-to-kit comparison, Kazuha is better, but of course, reasons for wishing for a character go beyond whether certain characters are better than others. And though I may be painting Venti in a bad light, truthfully I'm not trying to. I believe he is good and I would not say he's outdated. If you were to wish for him, he would perform well and fulfill his role and be outright broken in certain scenarios, while a fair bit weaker in some other scenarios. It's just the problems Venti has in some certain instances are a bit of a big deal, while Kazuha has none of these problems, all while being able to provide big buffs. With that being said, this is the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed and gained from this analysis of Venti and Kazuha. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. Hopefully this video helped you in figuring out who you should wish for. If any of you do have questions regarding Kazuha or Venti, please do not hesitate and let me know them in the comment section. I'd be happy to help out. Thank you all again for 200 subscribers. It's such an amazing feeling to see growth on this channel and all the support I get from you all. Thank you to each and every one of you, all the kindness you guys show me with every like, subscribe, and comment. Really, it does mean a lot to me. So thank you all. I will speak to all of you very soon. Take care, and thank you once again.